Okay, we're on page 100 on top. At the bottom it's 184. Okay, okay, we're in the middle over here. Okay, let me say orally without Rebbe is explaining, and then we'll continue further. The Rebbe was speaking the greatness of action of mitzvahs, because we have to elevate the physical world. And therefore, the Rebbe says, if you think a mitzvah, even learning a davening, if somebody doesn't say, verbally articulate the words of davening, they did not fulfill their obligation, because you have to verbally say the words. Even though you read the words with your lips, not with your lips, with your eyes, you did not fulfill that. Why? Because it needs to come into a physical setting. So then the Rebbe asked the question, if so, why does the Gemara say that if you make a bracha without intent, it's like a body without a soul? If the primary thing, the Rebbe is asking, is action, so why do you need kavanah? So the Rebbe started explaining that everything in the world has a soul, which is the power of Hashem keeping it in existence. Okay? And as far as that's concerned, everything is a concealment of godliness. Everything is a concealment of godliness. And these four things, the inanimate, plant, animal, and human, correspond with the four letters of God's name. It corresponds with the four worlds, he said. Now, obviously, even though everything is a concealment of God, not the inanimate sees God, not the plant, not the animal, not the human, nevertheless, the Rebbe is starting to say now, you can't compare the life in inanimate and plant to the life of animal and human. Inanimate has no life at all. It's inanimate. It doesn't move. It doesn't go nothing. Plant is also a very limited form of life. But animal and human is a much greater form of life. So even though everything is a concealment of godliness, you still can't compare the two. And that's what we're middle on. So he's going to say, in the middle of the page, in 100, on top 184 at the bottom. The same thing, mitzvahs that are dependent on speech. And movement of lips. Beli kavana, if you don't do it with intent, you just say the words. Nechshav kamaisa mamish kanal, it's considered an action. Legabi ha'arev amshachas erin tabaruchun, compared to the revelation of godliness. Hameira umelubeshes, which shines and dresses into the kavanas hamitzvahs ma'aser shadim miskaven basiyasim, that a person, I'm going to read that a person intends with his action to cling to Hashem. Meaning like this: granted action, which is basically more inanimate than speech and thought. Okay, intent, kavana is thought. Thought, like we learned last time, is more connected to the soul. Speech is less connected to the soul, and action is even less connected to the soul. So granted, the main thing is action. The main thing is to do the mitzvah. And again, like we learned, if you have a pair of tefillin on the table, you think every possible intent, Kabbalistic, halachic, you think everything about tefillin, but you don't put them on, you didn't do the mitzvah. You put them on without thinking anything, except that generally that I'm doing a mitzvah, you did the mitzvah. Because action counts. But nevertheless, the Rebbe says, when you have intent, the action is like the body. The intent is like the soul. And Hashem wants, and this is what he's going to say soon, Hashem wanted, just like he wanted us to do the physical action of the mitzvah, Hashem wants us to put life into that action of the mitzvah, which is really through intent, through kavanah. And we'll see, let's see it inside now. V'chein kavanas hatefillah, the Krishma Uberchisa. The same thing, the intent of davening of Shema and the blessings of Shema. The Shar Brachis, Shebakavanasi Bahem. When a person does them with intent, Medabik Machshafti V'Sichli B'Yiz Barich. Okay? And I'm going to read 3 more lines and I'm going to explain this whole thing. Not that Dveikus HaMachshava V'Seichel Adam B'Yiz Barich. Not that the connection of intellect or thinking is greater connection than action. Like Elam Neshazol Gamkin Ritzayni Yiz Barich. This is what Hashem wants. In other words, let me go off a little bit and to explain what's going on here. The Jews said, by Matan Torah, the Jews said, Nasa v'nishma. Okay? We're going to do, and then we'll understand it. Why isn't Nasa enough? We're doing. In other words, you ask a person, will you do me a favor? What's the normal answer? Let me hear what it is. Right? What's the favor? Let me hear. So what was the greatness of the Jews by Matan Torah? They said, blind faith will do whatever you want. Will you do me a favor? Whatever you want. Why did the Jews need to add the word nishma? We'll also understand it. The main thing is doing. Why did they need to say nishma? And the answer Chassidus explains is very simple. God gave us a brain, which is the highest faculty of the human. Hashem wants that we should connect our intelligence, our thoughts, and our intent also with Hashem. If a person just does action mitzvahs without any intent, without any feeling, okay? So bottom line is, our brain is not connecting to Hashem. Our hands are, our feet are, our stomach is, our mouth is, if it's a mitzvah of eating. But you're not connecting your brain to Hashem. The highest faculty of the person is the brain. That is what Hashem also wants, that it should be connected. So granted, Nas is a very great thing. Blind faith, whatever you want, we're going to do. But the Jews also had to say Nishma, because Hashem, like he says, just like Hashem wants us to do the physical mitzvah, he says, this is also what Hashem wants. What? The dafka, to cling to Hashem, the seichel with your intellect, or machshava in your thought, the kavanas mitzvahs maisius, and the intent of the mitzvahs. Now, intent is higher faculty than action. And we know, right? Intellect is above action. But the kavan is krishma tefillah v'shar brachas. And he says, this will of Hashem that I'm fulfilling by having intent, understanding the reason of the mitzvah, the intent of the mitzvah, the feeling of the mitzvah, which coming into the mitzvah when I do it, case is infinitely greater. The infinitely greater than the will of Hashem. Now the Rebbe says very simple. The will of Hashem is higher in intellect and thought than it is in speech and action. So therefore, if it's a greater revelation, because obviously, just like inanimate, there's less revelation of godliness. Plant is a little bit more, animals a little bit more, humans a little bit more, but there's more revelation of godliness in a person than there is in an animal, and there is in plant. So you're talking about action, which is hands and feet, so to speak, compared to the will of Hashem that exists in the mind of the person. In other words, when we connect action, our action to Hashem, we're connecting ourselves to Hashem's action, creation of the world, so to speak. But when we have intent and we think and we learn about it and we think about it and we do it with kavanah, what actually is happening is we're getting this higher level of godly connection through the kavanah. And therefore, just like the neshama in the body is great, but the neshama gives the life to the body. The kavanah of the mitzvah gives the life to the body, because then we're connecting, Dr. Rebbe is explaining, our mind, our chokhmah, our seichel, and our thought. The higher faculty is thought, then speech, then action. And that's why Dr. Rebbe says that's why it's so important. But the Gemara says that if you do a mitzvah without kavanah, it's like a neshama without a body. Body without a neshama. And he says, Shukeli u'malbush neshama, because the body is a vessel for the neshama. K'mei guf mitzvah atzma, just like the body of the mitzvah, the action of the mitzvah, is keli u'malbush lekavanose. Just like the body is the vessel for the soul, the action of the mitzvah is the vessel. It's the vessel for the intent of the it's the vessel for the intent of the mitzvah, because Hashem has a reason why He does it, and therefore av shebishtei mitzvah kavanasa even though both are the will of Hashem. There's a will of Hashem in the action. There's a will of Hashem in the thoughts, in the kavanah intent. Without any change, God forbid. He says, nevertheless, the revelation is not the same level of symptom. It's not the same level of concealment. God's intent is more God's level of revelation is more revealed in the intent of the mitzvah, which is the intellect and the thought, much greater than the action of the mitzvah. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, even though the whole time we were speaking, the action of the mitzvah is what really mattered, because Hashem wanted a dwelling place in the lowest of the lowest thing. What Hashem wants us is to reveal godliness in the low essence of the world. Nevertheless, Hashem wants us to reveal it also in the higher planes, in the higher levels. Hashem wants us to reveal it in the higher levels. And therefore, it's kavanah. The mitzvah without kavanah is like a body without a soul. Both, he says, are equal what Hashem wants. Hashem wants us to do the mitzvah. Hashem wants to do a kavanah. Both. At the same time, we have to realize one's a body and one's a soul. When you want to do a mitzvah, if you remember, when we were learning about tshuva, we're talking about Yom Kippur, we're discussing tshuva. And we learned that when a person, God forbid, sins, there's two parts to the sin. There's the action of sin. Okay, let's say, God forbid, you eat non-kosher. So there's the action of eating it. That's the action of the sin. And then you have the enjoyment of the sin. Okay? Therefore, we learned what Tzemach Tzedek says, that the action of the sin creates a body of the sin. And the enjoyment of the sin creates the soul of the sin. So now you have an entity, as David HaMelech says, Chatasi negi samid, my sin is always opposite to me, which means you actually create an entity of a sin with the body and the soul. You're creating an entity of sin with body and soul. And therefore we learn tshuva is two parts. You have to regret, that removes the soul of the sin. Verbal articulation of confession, that's action, that removes the body of the sin. But you have the same thing in Kedusha. When a person does a mitzvah, they create, so to speak, an entity of a mitzvah. Now that entity of a mitzvah has two parts to it. There's the body of the mitzvah, which is the action that you did the mitzvah. And then you have the soul of the mitzvah. Just like in, God forbid, in the sin, it's the enjoyment of the sin. Here, it's the enjoyment of the mitzvah, the intent of the mitzvah. Because when you understand better what you're doing, you do it much differently than if you just do it without knowing anything. Yes, the action is great, and that's what really matters. You can't have a neshama, you can have a neshama without a guf, but God didn't create in this world souls without bodies. This world primarily is bodies, with the neshama that gives life to the body. So the same thing with Alter Rebbe is explaining. All the symptom is the same. There's no difference between inanimate, plant, animal, and human. It's all a concealment of God. It's all in this physical world that goes through klipas neiga to come into the world. That's a given. Nevertheless, there's still a difference of a neshama, of a person, versus an animal, versus a plant, versus an animal. It's still different. It's a greater revelation. So therefore, the greater revelation of godliness, if you do a mitzvah without intent, it's like an inanimate mitzvah. There's no life to the mitzvah. You didn't do any kavanah. So it's like the inanimate object that needs to be elevated, granted. But you want to make it a little bit, more alive. And that's what kavanah the mitzvah. And that's what Alter Rebbe said, that's very important. And he says, Afal PK, nevertheless, ha'ara eina shava b'china symptom is pashtus. Okay? And in fact, Alter Rebbe says, like when you learn in the comment in the note at the side, Alter Rebbe says, like it says in Eitz Chaim, that the kavan of the mitzvah learning Torah is like or, and the body of the mitzvah, that's called the guf. So that's called the keli, the vessel. So you have or and keli. The keli is the vessel of the mitzvah, but you want the mitzvah to be alive. Like we learned previously, that a bird has two wings. Now the body of the bird, halachically, if you clip the wings, you take off the wings, it's still a kosher bird. You can shecht it. It's not called treifa. You can eat it. You can shecht it and eat it. So why did Hashem make the wings? Because without the wings, the bird stays on the ground. It doesn't go anywhere. The bird wants to fly up. You need the right wing and the left wing. One wing is also not enough. Hashem could have, think about it. Hashem could have made a bird fly with one wing. Like a helicopter. Why does it need two wings? Because in Avodas Hashem, it's two things. Ava and Yira. Love and fear. Love and awe. And therefore Hashem made a bird to fly up with two wings, because Hashem teaches us in order for a mitzvah. The body of the mitzvah is the body of the bird. It's a good mitzvah, even if you don't have wings. What's the purpose of the wings? You want the mitzvah to fly up to a higher level, meaning, in simple English, you want to have a greater revelation of godliness. That's what up and down means. Not you do a mitzvah goes up 100 miles up. Up means a greater revelation of Hashem. Down means a smaller revelation of Hashem, a lower revelation of Hashem, a lesser revelation of Hashem. What does Hashem want? That this physical item that we're doing the mitzvah with should fly up. What do you mean fly up? Then you get much more revelation of godliness. Because now you have the feeling of the mitzvah, you have the intent of the mitzvah, and that makes the bird go up much higher. And that's why that's important. And he says now, even that is divided into 4 divisions. He go from mitzvahs atzmam, even in the body of mitzvahs. There's 2 levels. Mitzvahs ma'asiyas mamish, or mitzvahs pluyas b'dibur or machshava, k'mei talmud Torah v'krishma, v'tfilah berach samazim v'shabrachas. Basically, there's 2 levels of mitzvah. Action mitzvah and verbal mitzvah. Like it says, there's mitzvahs ma'asiyas mamish, action mitzvah, putting on tefillin, eating matzah, benching lulav, whatever. And then you have the mitzvahs, which are dependent on speech and thought, like Talmud Torah and Krishma and Tefillah and all those things. Therefore, kavon is some mitzvahs. Therefore, just like the mitzvahs are divided into two, body, action, and speech, the intent of the mitzvah, which is also like the neshama of the body, gamken nechleket gamken shtei madregas, also is divided into two. Like shtei madregas haneshama, which have a guf hachumri shein chayim medaber. It says like this. You have a body of a person, you have a body of an animal. Just like in the mitzvahs, there's mitzvahs in action and there's mitzvahs in speech and thought. In the kavod of the mitzvah, which is the soul of the mitzvah, you can have a soul of an animal, there's also soul, and then you can have the soul of the person. That's also divided into two. Okay, we'll just start this. Kimisha daita yofa. Because a person has a proper, good head, intelligent enough. Ledasas Hashem, to understand godliness a little bit. Or is beinim b'gedulosi, and to meditate in God's greatness. Okay, let me say this, it's getting late. Let me just say another point without Rebbe saying here. Earlier in Tanya, without Rebbe speaking about meditating into the greatness of Hashem, there's two aspects he says over there. Based on the person's intellectual capacity. Some people are blessed with better heads than others. And then he says, it's also based, how much godliness a person can understand is dependent on two things. Number one is dependent on what type of brain you have. If you have a deeper head, you can have a deeper understanding of godliness. And then he says something else, based on the source of your neshama. Because a person with a greater neshama, because of the neshama, can have a deeper understanding of godliness, even greater than somebody with a better head. But their neshama is much greater. And that neshama, because of the neshama, it's open, greater neshama than in other Jews. That greatness of the neshama above causes them to have a much better understanding of godliness. Therefore, like we mentioned, the Baal Shem Tov once said that whoever asks him a question, he'll answer it. Whoever says a statement, he'll refute it. What does that mean? The explanation is as follows. There's Torah in each world. Asiya, Yetzira, Bria, Asilas. There's a level of Torah in each world. A question in Asiya, in the lowest world, in a higher world, there's an answer to it because it's a greater level of Torah. In a lower level of Torah, you have a question. In a greater level of Torah, it's automatically answered. Not only that, if in a lower level something seems to be understood, in a higher level, you can refute it. I said many times a famous story. There was a famous sage in the Mittel Rebbe's time. His very good friend with the Mittel Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Kiva Eger. Rabbi Kiva Eger was a brilliant, brilliant scholar. And, when in yeshiva, when he used to ask a question without an answer, the big thing in yeshiva was try to find an answer to his question. He was brilliant in learning. And he once came into a shtetl, he came into a city and he walks into the shul and the rabbi is giving a Gemara class, for Balabatim. The rabbi is teaching the Gemara, the students are listening, they're participating, and they finish their class, they close the Gemara, everybody goes out, and they're happy. They had a good Gemara class. And Rabbi Kiva Eger started crying. And he said, these people understand the Gemara, and I don't. I don't understand it. But his not understanding was not a level of their understanding. They understood it on a much lower level. His problem was he didn't understand it on the highest of levels. To give you a simple example, you have a first pasuk in Chumash, Bereishis bara Elokim et hashamayim v'asada. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. A kid learns it. They go to school. They're excited. They're learning Chumash. They have the Chumash party. They learn the first pasuk of Chumash. They get 100 on the test. They know Bereshis in the beginning. Okay, they understand it. On their level, they do understand it. They get 100%. But the deepest of minds didn't even begin to understand that pasuk. But that level of not understanding is much, much greater than that level of understanding. So the greater the neshama, the greater that. So therefore, when there's a question in the lower world, in the higher world, there's an answer. If there's a statement in the lower world, in the higher world, you can ask the question. Okay, anyway, that's it. Shabbos is Yud Shvat, don't forget. Mitzvah Shem, have a great Shabbos, everybody. Monday night, 8 o'clock will be Parsha class. See all of you. Until then, have a great Shabbos, a great weekend, a great week, a great everything. We should hear good news in Israel.